My son sent me on a trip to Spain. On the way, I realized I had forgotten my passport. When I got home, I overheard a conversation between him and my daughter-in-law that made me freeze. When I realized what they were planning, I decided to make them regret it 20-fold. I'm glad to have you here, to follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong when Desmond showed up at my door with that airline ticket, and that nervous smile I hadn't seen since he was 12 and broke my favorite vase. My son had never been one for spontaneous gestures, especially not expensive ones. But there he was, standing on my porch at 8 in the morning with coffee and pastries from that bakery downtown, acting like he'd just won the lottery. "Mom, I have the most amazing surprise for you," he said, practically bouncing on his feet like a child. At 62, I'd learned to be suspicious of surprises, especially from my 38-year-old son, who usually only called when he needed money or when Fallon reminded him it had been too long since his last visit. I led him into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised him after his father died when Desmond was only 15. The morning light caught the worn spots on my table, the same table where he'd done his homework while I worked double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat. Those were hard years, but they were honest years. We were a team then. "Spain, Mom! Can you believe it?" He spread the travel documents across my table like he was dealing cards. 2 weeks in Barcelona and Madrid. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, everything included. I stared at the papers, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The ticket was dated for tomorrow. Tomorrow. Who books an international trip for the next day? I looked up at my son, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. He wouldn't meet my gaze directly, kept looking over my shoulder toward the living room where I knew Fallon was probably waiting in the car. "Desmond, honey, this is very generous, but tomorrow? I can't just pack up and leave tomorrow. I have responsibilities here. Mrs. Patterson next door depends on me to check on her, and I have my book club on Thursday, and—" "Mom." His voice got that edge to it, the same edge Fallon used when she wanted something. "You're 62 years old. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question stung because it was true, but also because of how he said it. Like my life of sacrifice was somehow pathetic. Like all those years of working myself to the bone to give him a good life meant nothing. But why the rush? Why tomorrow? He shifted in his chair, and I caught a whiff of Fallon's expensive perfume on his clothes. She had expensive taste in everything. Perfume, clothes, cars, houses, especially houses. My house, specifically, which she'd been eyeing like a vulture ever since she married my son 3 years ago. The travel agent said this was the last spot available, some kind of special package deal. "If we don't book it now, you'll lose it forever." The words came out too fast, too rehearsed. My son had never been a good liar, but apparently, marriage to Fallon was teaching him new skills. I picked up the airline ticket, examining it more closely. First class to Barcelona, departing tomorrow at 6 in the evening. Return ticket dated for 2 weeks later. Round trip cost, over $4,000. Where did my son, who worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company, get $4,000 for a spontaneous trip? "Desmond, where did this money come from?" His face flushed red, the same way it used to when I caught him sneaking cookies before dinner. "Fallon and I have been saving up. We wanted to do something special for you." Fallon, of course. The woman who complained about spending $20 on a birthday gift for me last year was suddenly eager to spend $4,000 on a trip to Spain. The same woman who had jokingly suggested I might be happier in a retirement community where I could make friends my own age. I appreciate the thought, really I do, but— "Mom, please." He reached across the table and grabbed my hand, his grip almost desperate. "You've never been anywhere. Dad always promised to take you to Europe, but—" He trailed off, leaving the familiar ache of my husband's broken promises hanging in the air. That was a low blow, and he knew it. Robert had indeed promised me trips we never took, dreams we never fulfilled before the heart attack took him away at 51. But those broken promises weren't my son's fault, and using them to manipulate me felt cruel. I need to think about it. There's nothing to think about. His voice got louder, more frustrated. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The package expires today if you don't take it. The urgency in his voice set off every alarm bell I had. In my 62 years, I'd learned that when someone pressures you to make a big decision quickly, it's usually because they don't want you to have time to think it through. Why is this so important to you, Desmond? He pulled his hand back and looked toward the window where I could see Fallon's silhouette in their new BMW, another expensive purchase they somehow afforded on his salary. Because I love you, Mom. Because you deserve this. The words should have warmed my heart, but something about the way he said them made me feel cold instead. I'd raised this boy, changed his diapers, stayed up all night when he had fever, worked myself nearly to death to pay for his college. I knew when he was lying to me, but I also knew my son was capable of love, even if Fallon was slowly squeezing it out of him like poison from a wound. Okay, I said finally, but I'll need to pack properly, and I should call the airline to confirm. No! The word exploded out of him, then he tried to cover it with a laugh. I mean, everything's already taken care of. Just pack light. You can buy whatever you need there. Pack light. For a 2-week trip to Europe, another red flag. I'll need my passport. Of course, just make sure you have everything ready tonight. The car will pick you up at 3 tomorrow to get to the airport on time. A car service, not him driving me, not even offering to drive me. After he left, I sat in my quiet kitchen staring at those airline tickets. The house felt different somehow, like it was holding its breath. I walked through the rooms, looking at my life spread out around me. The photos on the mantel, the books I'd collected over the years, the quilt my mother made me. Everything that mattered to me was here, in this house that I'd almost lost twice to foreclosure after Robert died, that I'd fought so hard to keep. I went upstairs to pack, but instead found myself sitting on my bed, staring at my passport in my hands. Valid for 3 more years, barely used except for one trip to Canada 5 years ago. Something was wrong. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. But Desmond was my son, my only child. Surely he wouldn't. The thought was too terrible to finish. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle around me, wondering if I was being paranoid or if a mother's intuition was trying to save me from something I couldn't yet see. Tomorrow, I would find out which one it was. The car arrived exactly at 3 o'clock, just like Desmond promised, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who barely grunted when I came out with my single suitcase. I'd packed light, like my son insisted, though every fiber of my being rebelled against leaving for 2 weeks with so little. As we pulled away from my house, I watched it shrink in the rear window until it disappeared around the corner. Something twisted in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't shake that I was seeing it for the last time. I pushed the thought away. I was being ridiculous, paranoid. This was a gift from my son who loved me. The driver didn't speak during the 40-minute ride to the airport. When I tried to make conversation, asking if he'd driven to the international terminal before, he just nodded and turned up the radio. Classical music filled the silence, but it felt like a funeral dirge. At the airport, he deposited me at the curb with my bag and drove away before I could even tip him. I stood there for a moment, watching the chaos of travelers around me. Families saying goodbye, couples heading off on adventures, business travelers talking loudly on phones. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Inside, the first-class check-in line was mercifully short. The agent, a young woman with a bright smile and tired eyes, took my ticket and asked for my passport. I reached into my purse, then my carry-on bag, then my purse again. My hands started shaking as I searched through every pocket, every compartment. "Ma'am? Your passport?" I think I left it at home." The words came out in a whisper. The agent's smile became sympathetic. "Oh no, I'm sorry, but you can't travel internationally without a valid passport. Would you like me to see if we can reschedule your flight?" Reschedule. I thought about Desmond's insistence that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that the package expired today. If this was really the trip of a lifetime he claimed it was, why was I feeling relieved instead of devastated? How much would it cost to reschedule? For a first-class ticket like this? Probably around $800 plus any fare difference. $800. More money than I spent on groceries in 2 months. Money my son supposedly didn't have to spare. I think I need to go home and get my passport first. The agent nodded sympathetically. The next flight to Barcelona isn't until Friday. I can put you on the wait list if you'd like to try again. I took a taxi home, my heart pounding the entire way. Something was pushing me to get back to my house as quickly as possible, though I couldn't say what. The taxi driver, an older man with kind eyes, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay, lady? You look upset." "I forgot my passport." "Ah, that's the worst. Happened to my daughter once. Missed her honeymoon flight. But hey, better to catch it now than at the gate, right?" "Right." But as we pulled into my driveway, I noticed Desmond's car parked on the street. Strange. He should be at work at this time of day. And there was another car I didn't recognize, a red convertible that looked expensive. I paid the taxi driver and walked slowly toward my front door, fishing my keys out of my purse. As I put the key in the lock, I heard voices from inside. Loud voices. Arguing voices. "Told you this was a stupid plan." That was Fallon, her voice shrill with panic. What if she comes back? What if she remembers something? She won't come back. The flight leaves in 3 hours. By the time she realizes she forgot her passport, she'll already be in Barcelona. My son's voice, but harder than I'd ever heard it. Cold. I froze with my hand on the doorknob. They thought I was already gone. They thought I was already on that plane. But what if she doesn't go through with it? What if she gets suspicious and comes home? She won't. You saw how guilty she looked when I mentioned Dad's broken promises. She's been feeling sorry for herself for years. This is her chance to finally do something for herself, and she knows it. My chest felt tight. They were talking about me like I was some pathetic old woman they needed to manage, like I was a problem to be solved. "I still think we should have waited longer," Fallon continued. "Made sure she was completely on board. We don't have longer. The bank called yesterday. If we don't make the payment by Friday, they start foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure? What foreclosure? I owned my house outright. I'd made the last payment 3 years ago, right before Desmond's wedding. "Maybe your mother has more money tucked away somewhere. Old people always do. Trust me, if she had money, I'd know about it. She tells me everything about her finances. Always has." That wasn't true. I'd never told Desmond about the savings account I kept for emergencies, the one with nearly $20,000 I'd been building up slowly over the years. I'd never told him about the small inheritance from my aunt, or the life insurance policy Robert left me. Some things a woman kept to herself. "Well, once the house is transferred, we can figure out the rest. Your mother will understand eventually. She's not stupid." "The house isn't going to transfer itself, Fallon. We need those papers from your lawyer friend, and we need them signed before she gets back." "Papers? What papers?" I heard footsteps moving toward the living room, toward the front of the house, toward the door where I was standing. In a panic, I quietly backed away from the door and crept around to the side of the house, where I could listen through my kitchen window. "Did you bring the documents?" "They're in my car. Power of attorney forms, property transfer papers, everything we need. Dr. Martinez already signed the medical assessment saying she's showing signs of early dementia." My blood turned to ice. Dr. Martinez was my family doctor. I'd seen him just 6 months ago for my annual checkup, and he'd told me I was in excellent health for my age. Sharp as a tack, he'd said. "How much did that cost us?" $2,000. "But it'll be worth it when we own this place outright." $2,000 to lie about my mental state. $2,000 to steal my house from under me. "And you're sure the timing will work? She'll be gone long enough for us to get everything filed?" 2 weeks minimum. By the time she gets back, everything will be legal and binding. She'll be devastated, of course, but what can she do? The medical assessment shows she's not competent to manage her own affairs anymore. What if she fights it? With what money? You think she can afford a lawyer to fight this? And even if she could, who's going to believe a confused old woman over official medical documents? I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. These weren't strangers planning to rob me. This was my son. My own son, working with his wife to steal everything I had. I just want to make sure we're covered legally. Fallon, relax. Once she's declared incompetent, I become her legal guardian. I can make all her financial decisions. Sell the house, move her into that budget nursing home we looked at. She'll be taken care of, and we'll finally be able to start our real life together. Budget nursing home. They were planning to put me in a nursing home. God, I'll be glad when this is over. I'm so tired of pretending to like her. Do you know how hard it is to smile and play the loving daughter-in-law when all I want to do is tell her to stop meddling in our marriage? Soon, baby. Very soon, we'll have everything we want. I heard the sound of them kissing. Then Fallon's voice again. I should go get those papers. The sooner we get them filed, the sooner we can stop pretending. I crept away from the window and made it back to my car just as the front door opened. Through my windshield, I watched Fallon walk to her red convertible, her high heels clicking on my driveway like a countdown to my destruction. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. Long blonde hair, perfect figure, clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When Desmond first brought her home, I'd been so happy he'd found someone. After his father died, he'd been so lonely, so lost. I thought Fallon would help him heal. Instead, she'd turned him into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could plan to steal his own mother's home and put her in a nursing home. Someone who could lie to her face about loving her while plotting to destroy her life. As I watched her drive away, probably to get those forged papers, I felt something shift inside me. The sadness and shock were still there, but underneath them, something harder was growing, something that tasted like steel and felt like resolve. They thought I was a helpless old woman they could manipulate and discard. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I drove around for an hour after watching Fallon leave, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just heard. My son, my own son, was planning to steal my house and have me declared incompetent. The boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, was going to put me in a nursing home so he could live in the house I'd worked myself nearly to death to keep. But the shock was wearing off, and underneath it, something cold and calculating was taking its place. I'd survived losing my husband when I was 43. I'd survived raising a teenager alone while working 2 jobs. I'd survived foreclosure threats and medical bills and every other crisis life had thrown at me. I wasn't about to let my own son destroy me now. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I drove straight to downtown and parked in front of the law offices of Margaret Chen, the attorney who'd helped me with Robert's estate years ago. Margaret was sharp, honest, and had no patience for people who tried to take advantage of others. "Bessie!" Margaret's face lit up when I walked into her office. What a wonderful surprise. "How are you doing?" "I need your help, Margaret. Urgently." Her expression immediately became serious as she gestured for me to sit down. I told her everything. The forced trip to Spain, the conversation I'd overheard, the plans to forge medical documents and steal my house. Margaret's face grew darker with each detail. "This is elder abuse, Bessie. Criminal elder abuse. We could have them arrested. I don't want them arrested. Not yet. I want to protect myself first, then figure out how to handle Desmond." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. Handling Desmond. Like he was a problem to be managed instead of my beloved son. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "First things first, we need to check if any fraudulent documents have already been filed." She made some calls while I sat there, my stomach churning. 20 minutes later, she hung up with a grim expression. "They've been busy. Someone filed a petition this morning to have you declared mentally incompetent, supported by a medical assessment from Dr. Martinez. There's also a preliminary power of attorney document that supposedly gives Desmond control over your finances." My chest felt tight. How is that possible? I never signed anything. The signature looks legitimate to an untrained eye, but I'd bet money it's forged. The good news is these things take time to process. The hearing isn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. That gives us time to fight back. What do we do? Margaret pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. First, we get you a complete medical and psychiatric evaluation from an independent doctor. Then we file counter motions to block all these proceedings. We'll also need to secure your assets immediately, freeze your accounts, put everything in trust. Make sure they can't touch anything while this plays out. How much will this cost? Don't worry about that right now. This is exactly the kind of case I live for, stopping predators who target vulnerable people, even when the predators are family members. Especially when they're family members, I thought bitterly. We spent the next 2 hours going through my finances, my property records, everything. Margaret was thorough and professional, but I could see the anger in her eyes when she looked at the forged documents. Bessie, I have to ask, do you want to try to work this out with your son privately, or do you want to go nuclear? What does nuclear mean? Criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Prison time for both of them if we can prove everything. I thought about the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, terrified and seeking comfort. The teenager who cried in my arms when his father died. The young man who'd been so proud when he graduated college, the first in our family to do so. Not yet. Let me try to handle Desmond first, but I want all the legal protections in place. Done. And Bessie? You're going to need to be very careful. If they realize you know what they're planning, they might accelerate their timeline or try something more drastic. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I nodded. I understand. Margaret handed me a business card. This is Dr. Sarah Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist. She's expecting your call. Get that evaluation done as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if she can fit you in. I left Margaret's office feeling stronger than I had in hours. I had a plan now, professional help, legal protection. But I still had to go home and face my son, pretending I knew nothing while he prepared to destroy my life. When I pulled into my driveway, Desmond's car was still there. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I got out, grabbed my suitcase, and walked to my front door like a woman returning from a failed trip to the airport. "Mom?" Desmond's voice called out as soon as I opened the door. He appeared in the hallway, and I could see the panic in his eyes. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you on the plane?" I forced myself to look disappointed and embarrassed. "I forgot my passport. Can you believe it? After all your planning, I forgot the most important thing." Relief flooded his face so obviously it made me sick. "Oh no, that's terrible. But hey, these things happen. Maybe it's a sign you weren't ready for such a big trip." A sign. Like my subconscious had been trying to protect me all along. "I feel so stupid. And guilty. You spent all that money." "Don't worry about the money, Mom. Really. Maybe we can reschedule for later in the year." Later in the year, when I'd supposedly be in a nursing home and he'd own my house. "Where's Fallon? I thought I saw her car earlier." Another flash of panic. "She just stopped by to see how the trip preparations were going. She left to run some errands." Errands. Like getting forged legal documents to steal my life. "I'm so tired. I think I'll go lie down for a while." "That's a good idea. You've had a stressful day." I went upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door, but instead of lying down, I called Dr. Williams. She could see me first thing in the morning. Then I called my bank and put a temporary hold on all my accounts, claiming I was worried about potential fraud. The representative was helpful and assured me that no one could access my money without my physical presence and multiple forms of identification. Then I did something I'd never done before in my own house. I locked my bedroom door. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made me jump. When I heard Desmond moving around downstairs around midnight, I wondered what he was doing. Looking through my papers? Searching for bank statements or insurance policies? Or just lying awake like me, wrestling with what he was planning to do? The next morning I got up early and made breakfast like nothing had happened. Pancakes, bacon, coffee, Desmond's favorite since he was 8 years old. When he came downstairs, he looked surprised and touched. "You didn't have to do all this, Mom. I wanted to. I felt so bad about yesterday, ruining your surprise." He sat down across from me, and for a moment he looked like my little boy again. "You didn't ruin anything. There will be other opportunities." "Desmond," I reached across the table and took his hand. "You know I love you more than anything in this world, right?" His face crumpled slightly, and I saw a flash of the guilt he was carrying. "I love you too, Mom. And you know you can tell me anything? If you're in trouble, if you need help, you can always come to me." For a second, I thought he might break. His hand trembled in mine, and his eyes filled with tears. But then his phone rang, Fallon's ringtone, and the moment was lost. "I have to take this," he said, pulling his hand away. I listened to his side of the conversation. "Yes, today. I don't know, she came back. No, everything's fine. Okay, I'll meet you there." When he hung up, the guilty little boy was gone again, replaced by the stranger who was planning to betray me. "I have to go to work early today. Will you be okay here by yourself?" "Of course. I have my book club this afternoon anyway." "Book club. Right." He kissed my forehead, and I had to fight not to pull away. "I'll see you tonight." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the dirty dishes from our breakfast. This might be one of the last normal moments we'd ever have together. Tomorrow, after I got my psychiatric evaluation, after Margaret filed all the legal papers, everything would change. My son was trying to destroy me, but I wasn't going to let him. I was going to save us both, whether he wanted me to or not. The psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Williams went better than I'd hoped. She was a woman about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. For 2 hours, she put me through cognitive tests, memory exercises, and psychological assessments that would have challenged someone half my age. "Mrs. Henderson," she said when we were finished, "I can state with complete confidence that you are of sound mind and excellent mental capacity. In fact, your cognitive function is above average for your age group. Whoever suggested you were suffering from dementia was either grossly incompetent or deliberately lying. Can you put that in writing?" "Absolutely. I'll have a full report ready by this afternoon, and I'll be happy to testify on your behalf if this goes to court." Armed with Dr. Williams's report and Margaret's legal filings, I felt ready for whatever came next, but I wasn't prepared for what I found when I returned home that afternoon. There was a moving truck in my driveway. I sat in my car for a moment, watching 2 burly men carry my grandmother's antique dresser out of my house. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. They weren't waiting for legal proceedings. They were just taking my things. I got out of my car and walked toward the men carrying my furniture. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" One of them, a heavy-set man with tattoos covering his arms, looked confused. "Lady, we're just doing what we were hired to do, moving stuff out of this house." "Who hired you?" "Some woman. Said the old lady who lived here was going into a nursing home and the family needed to clear the place out." "Some woman. Fallon. I am the old lady who lives here, and I'm not going anywhere." The man looked genuinely concerned. "Ma'am, maybe you should call your family. We got a work order and everything. Can I see the work order?" He showed me a document with Fallon's signature authorizing the removal of all furniture and personal belongings from my address. At the bottom, it stated that the homeowner is no longer competent to make these decisions. "This is theft," I said quietly. "Look, lady, we don't want any trouble. Maybe you should work this out with whoever hired us. Where were you planning to take my things?" "Storage unit on the other side of town. We got the address right here." "At least they weren't throwing my belongings away." "Yet." "Please stop moving things until I can get this sorted out." The man looked at his partner, who shrugged. "We get paid by the hour either way. But lady, we can't wait around all day." I called Margaret immediately. She was furious when I explained what was happening. "They're escalating because they know they're running out of time. Don't let them take another thing. I'm calling the police right now." "What should I tell the movers?" "Tell them to put everything back exactly where they found it, or they'll be accessories to theft." When I relayed Margaret's message, The movers exchanged glances and started carrying my dresser back toward the house. They'd apparently dealt with family disputes before and knew when to back down. That's when Fallon arrived. She pulled up in her red convertible like she owned the place, which I suppose she thought she did. When she saw me talking to the movers, her face went from confusion to anger to something colder. "Bessie, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in Spain?" "I missed my flight," I said calmly. "Forgot my passport." How unfortunate. But she didn't look like she thought it was unfortunate at all. She looked like she was calculating her next move. "Well, since you're here, maybe we should talk." "I'd like that very much." We walked into my house that she'd been planning to steal, and sat in my living room. Fallon crossed her legs and smiled at me with all the warmth of a snake. "Bessie, I know this might seem confusing, but Desmond and I have been worried about you." "Worried about me?" "Your memory, your decision-making. The fact that you forgot your passport, for instance. That's not like you." I wanted to laugh. She was actually going to try to gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind. "I've been under a lot of stress lately," I said carefully. "Exactly. That's why we think it might be time to consider some changes. Maybe somewhere you could get more care, more support, like a nursing home?" Her smile got wider. "Not necessarily a nursing home, but perhaps a community where you'd have help with daily tasks, medication management, that sort of thing." "And what would happen to my house?" "Oh, you wouldn't need to worry about that. Desmond and I would take care of everything. Handle the sale, make sure you got a fair price." A fair price. After they'd had me declared incompetent so they could sell it for whatever they wanted. "That's very thoughtful of you, Fallon." "We just want what's best for you, Bessie. You know that, right?" I looked at this woman who was sitting in my living room, surrounded by my furniture that she'd tried to steal, calmly explaining how she was going to take my house and put me away. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Fallon, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you love my son?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "Of course I love him." "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're using him to get what you want. And what you want is my house." Her mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real Fallon underneath, cold, calculating, completely without conscience. "I think your memory problems are worse than we thought, Bessie. You're imagining things." Am I imagining the forged power of attorney documents? The fake medical assessment? The fact that you hired movers to steal my furniture while you thought I was out of the country? Fallon went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" She stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. "You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Would you like to see the real psychiatric evaluation I had done yesterday? The one that says I'm of perfectly sound mind? Or maybe the legal documents my attorney filed, blocking all your fraudulent paperwork?" The color drained from her face. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and called Margaret. "Hi, it's Bessie. Could you please tell Fallon what you told me about the criminal penalties for elder abuse and fraud?" I put the phone on speaker. Margaret's voice filled the room, crisp and professional. "Mrs. Henderson, the penalties for the crimes you've described can include up to 20 years in prison for each count of fraud, plus additional charges for conspiracy and elder abuse. The evidence you've gathered is more than sufficient for prosecution." Fallon sank back into her chair, her face white as paper. "Now," I said, ending the call, "let's talk about what happens next." "Bessie, please. You don't understand. Desmond owes money to some very dangerous people. We needed the house to pay them back. If we don't." "How much money?" $60,000. He's been gambling online, and when he couldn't pay, they started threatening him. Threatening both of us. $60,000. My son had gambled away $60,000 and was willing to steal my house to pay for it. Why didn't he just ask me for help? "Because I told him not to." The words exploded out of her. "I told him you'd never understand, that you'd judge him, that you'd make him feel like a failure. So instead, you convinced him to commit fraud." I convinced him to take what should have been his anyway. You're 62 years old, Bessie. How much longer do you really think you're going to live in this big house by yourself? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. In Fallon's mind, I was already dead and buried, my house just an asset waiting to be claimed. Where is my son right now? He's meeting with the people he owes money to, trying to buy more time. Call him. Tell him to come home immediately. Bessie, please don't do this. If you turn us in, they'll kill him. For the first time since this started, I felt sorry for her. Not because of what she'd done to me, but because she was so empty inside that she thought money was worth destroying a family over. I'm not going to turn you in, Fallon, but I am going to save my son. What do you mean? Call him, now. With shaking hands, she dialed Desmond's number. When he answered, I could hear the stress in his voice even from across the room. Fallon? How did it go? Did you get the storage unit sorted out? Desmond, you need to come home right now. Your mother wants to talk to both of us. My mother? But she's supposed to be... She knows, Desmond. She knows everything. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my son's voice came through, broken and defeated. I'll be right there. While we waited for Desmond to arrive, Fallon and I sat in silence. She was crying now, quiet tears that smeared her perfect makeup. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was tired. Why? I asked finally. Why did you hate me so much that you wanted to destroy me? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't hate you. I resented you. For what? For being perfect. For being the mother Desmond always compared me to. Do you know how impossible it is to compete with a dead father and a saint mother? I almost laughed. A saint? Fallon, I worked in a diner for 15 years. I've made more mistakes than you can imagine. I'm not perfect. But you sacrificed everything for him. How do I compete with that? You don't compete with it. You become part of it. You become family. She looked at me with something that might have been regret. It's too late for that now. Maybe it was, but it wasn't too late to save my son. 20 minutes later, I heard Desmond's car in the driveway. When he walked through the front door, he looked like he'd aged 10 years since morning. His face was pale, his clothes wrinkled, his hands shaking. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. Hello, son. I think it's time we had a talk. My son stood in my doorway looking like a man walking to his execution. His shoulders were slumped, his face ashen, and when our eyes met, I saw something I'd never seen before in Desmond's expression. Shame so deep it seemed to physically hurt him. Sit down, son. He moved to the couch like his legs might give out at any moment. Fallon was already there, tissues clutched in her hands. Her earlier defiance replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Maybe part of her was glad the charade was finally over. I took my favorite chair, the one Robert used to tease me about because it was so old and worn. The same chair where I'd rocked Desmond to sleep as a baby, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd held him when he cried after his father's funeral. Now I was sitting in it to confront him about trying to steal my life. Before we start, I said carefully, I want you both to know that I love you, Desmond. Nothing that's happened changes that, but I need to understand how we got here. Desmond's face crumpled. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. This wasn't supposed to. Tell me about the gambling. His whole body seemed to deflate. It started small, just online poker, $5 or $10 here and there. After Dad died, I felt so lost, and it was something that made me feel in control, I guess. Like I could win something back. I thought about those dark months after Robert's death, when Desmond was 17 and angry at the world. I'd been so focused on keeping us financially afloat, working double shifts to pay the bills, that maybe I'd missed how much he was struggling emotionally. When did it get bigger? College. My roommate introduced me to these high-stakes online games. I was good at it, Mom. Really good. For a while, I was winning more than I was losing, but that changed. Last year, I hit a bad streak and started chasing losses. You know how they say never chase losses? Well, I chased them right off a cliff. Before I knew it, I owed $60,000 to people who don't accept payment plans. $60,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time in my life. Why didn't you come to me? Desmond looked at Fallon, then back at me. Because I was ashamed. Because you'd already sacrificed so much for me, and here I was, 38 years old, still screwing up my life. And because I told him not to. Fallon's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Both Desmond and I turned to look at her. I told him that asking you for money would just prove he was still a child who couldn't handle his own problems. I said that real men figure things out themselves. Fallon, Desmond's voice held a warning. No, she deserves to know the truth. All of it. Fallon looked directly at me, her eyes red but determined. I hated that you still had so much influence over him. Every time he had a problem, his first instinct was to call you. Every time we fought, he'd mention something you'd said or done. I felt like there were 3 people in our marriage. The words stung because there was truth in them. After Robert died, Desmond and I had become a tight unit. Maybe too tight. Maybe I had held on too long, made it too hard for him to fully separate and become his own man. So when the gambling debts became serious, you saw an opportunity. I saw a solution. You have this big house that you don't really need. Desmond is your only heir. We were just accelerating the inevitable by having me declared incompetent and stealing my home. We weren't stealing it. You were stealing it. Desmond's voice was firm, cutting through Fallon's justification. Mom, she's right about one thing. I should have come to you, but what we did, there's no excuse for it. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd somehow convinced himself that fraud was acceptable. How long have you been planning this? A few months. The threats were getting worse. These people, Mom, they're not just loan sharks. They're dangerous. They know where I work, where we live. They've been following us. Have they threatened Fallon? They've threatened all of us, including you. My blood went cold. What do you mean? Desmond buried his face in his hands. They said if I didn't pay up, they'd hurt my family. They know about you, where you live. They said old ladies have accidents all the time. The room went silent except for the sound of Fallon crying harder. These weren't just debts. These were death threats. Desmond, why didn't you go to the police? With what proof? Anonymous phone calls? Guys following me who disappear when I try to get a license plate number? And besides, even if the police believed me, what could they do? Arrest a few guys and wait for their friends to show up? I was starting to understand the impossible position my son had been in. Not that it excused what he'd done, but I could see how desperation and fear had twisted his judgment. So you decided to steal my house to pay them off. We decided to sell your house to pay them off. Mom, you're 62. This place is too big for you. You've said so yourself. I've said it's a lot of work to maintain. I never said I wanted to leave, but you could have used the money to get a nice apartment somewhere. Maybe even that retirement community you looked at last year. I had looked at a retirement community, but only because my neighbor Mrs. Patterson had asked me to go with her for moral support. I'd never expressed any interest in moving there myself. And what about the nursing home Fallon mentioned? Desmond looked confused. What nursing home? Fallon shifted uncomfortably. I may have suggested that option if your mother was having trouble adjusting to the transition. You mean if I refuse to go along with your plan? Bessie, you have to understand. No. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. I don't have to understand anything. You plan to steal my house, forge documents to have me declared incompetent, and put me in a nursing home against my will. That's not misguided love or tough decisions. That's elder abuse. Mom, please. Desmond stood too, reaching toward me. I know what we did was wrong, but we were desperate. These people are going to kill me if I don't pay them. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way. I don't have $60,000. I don't have any way to get $60,000. The house was the only solution. No, son. The house was the easiest solution. There's a difference. I walked to my kitchen and came back with my purse. From it, I pulled out my bank book, the one I'd never shown him, and opened it to the current balance page. $412. My emergency savings. Desmond stared at the number. Mom, that's not enough. It's a start. There's also your father's life insurance policy that I never touched. Another $15,000. That's still not enough. Then we'll figure out the rest. Together. Like a real family does. But Mom, that's your life savings. That's your security. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Desmond, you are my security. You always have been. I don't care about the money. I care about you. Fallon was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. You'd give up everything for him? After what we did to you? Yes, because that's what mothers do. But there are conditions. Both of them looked at me expectantly. First, Fallon, you need to decide right now whether you want to be part of this family or not. If you do, then you accept that families don't steal from each other, they don't lie to each other, and they don't try to destroy each other. If you can't accept that, then you need to leave. Fallon looked from me to Desmond and back again. And if I stay? Then you become my daughter-in-law in truth, not just on paper. That means we work together, we respect each other, and we build something better than what we had. And if I leave, then you leave. Desmond chooses his family or his wife, but he doesn't get both unless you choose to be family too. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Finally, Fallon spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to stay. I want to try. I looked at my son. And you? Are you willing to get help for the gambling? Real help, not just promises? Yes, whatever it takes. Good. Because we're going to need professional help to figure out how to handle these threats safely. This isn't just about money anymore. Desmond nodded, and for the first time in hours, he looked like he had hope. But I knew the hardest part was still coming. We had to figure out how to deal with dangerous people who expected their money, and we had to do it without getting anyone killed. The sun was setting outside my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the room where my family was finally telling each other the truth. Tomorrow, we'd start the real work of putting our lives back together, if we lived that long. 6 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen, in my house that I still owned, watching Desmond teach his stepfather's grandson how to play chess. The boy was 8 years old and impatient, but Desmond was gentle with him, explaining each move with the same patience I'd once shown when teaching Desmond the game. It had been a long 6 months. The day after our confrontation, we'd gone together to the FBI. It turned out that the people threatening Desmond were part of a larger investigation into illegal gambling operations. Agent Martinez, a woman about my age with steel gray hair and kind eyes, had been tracking this particular group for 2 years. Your son's situation isn't unique, she'd told us during our first meeting. These organizations specifically target people with gambling problems, offering easy credit, and then using threats when payment becomes impossible. We've been looking for someone on the inside who could help us build a case. Desmond had agreed to work with them. For 3 months, he wore a wire and recorded conversations with his handlers. It was dangerous work, but it was also redemptive. Every conversation he recorded helped build the case that would eventually shut down the entire operation. The day they made the arrests, I'd waited by my phone from dawn until sunset, terrified that something would go wrong. But Desmond called at 6 that evening, his voice shaky with relief. It's over, Mom. They got all of them. The gambling debts had been forgiven as part of Desmond's cooperation agreement. More importantly, the threat to our family was gone forever. But money and safety weren't the only things we'd had to rebuild. Fallon had kept her word about wanting to be part of the family, but it hadn't been easy. 3 months of family therapy with Dr. Rebecca Stone had been some of the most difficult conversations of my life. We'd talked about boundaries, about respect, about the difference between helping and enabling. Bessie, Dr. Stone had said during one particularly tough session, you saved your son's life by not enabling his gambling. But you also may have saved it by being willing to help when he truly needed it. The key is learning to tell the difference. Fallon had struggled the most. She'd grown up in a family where love was conditional, where affection was earned through achievement and success. The idea that someone would sacrifice for another person without expecting anything in return was foreign to her. I keep waiting for you to throw it in my face, she'd admitted to me one afternoon while we were working in my garden together. It had become our weekly ritual, tending to my tomatoes and roses while we talked through the complicated work of becoming a real family. Throw what in your face? That you saved us, that you gave up your life savings for Desmond, that you could have had us arrested, but didn't. I'd stopped weeding and looked at her, this young woman who'd almost destroyed my life, but who was now genuinely trying to build something better. Fallon, that's not how love works. Love doesn't keep score. She'd started crying then, right there among my tomato plants. My mother kept score of everything. Every dollar she spent on me, every opportunity she gave me, every mistake I made. I thought that was normal. It's not normal, and it's not healthy, and it's not how this family works. That had been a turning point for both of us. Desmond had thrown himself into recovery with the same intensity he'd once brought to gambling. He attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week, worked with a therapist specializing in addiction, and had voluntarily turned over control of all his finances to a professional money manager. I don't trust myself yet, he'd told me. Maybe someday I will, but right now, I need other people to help me make good decisions. The humility in that admission had broken my heart and made me proud at the same time. Now, watching him with this child, I could see glimpses of the man he was becoming. Patient, thoughtful, present in a way he hadn't been for years. Grandma Bessie, can you make us some hot chocolate? The boy, Tommy, looked up at me with gap-toothed grin. He wasn't actually my grandson. He was the child of Fallon's sister's new husband, but somehow I'd become Grandma Bessie to him anyway. Of course, sweetie. As I heated milk on the stove, I listened to Desmond explaining why certain chess moves were better than others. His voice was calm, encouraging. He'd learned patience through his recovery, learned to think several moves ahead in life the same way he was teaching Tommy to think several moves ahead in chess. Fallon came into the kitchen carrying her laptop. She'd gone back to school to finish the nursing degree she'd abandoned years earlier. At 31, she was one of the older students in her program, but she was also one of the most dedicated. "How's the studying going?" I asked. "Hard, but good. I have a test on Monday about medication interactions." She sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed her temples. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm too old to be starting over." "Nobody's too old to start over. I should know." She smiled at that. It had become a running joke between us. The 62-year-old woman and the 31-year-old woman who were both learning how to be different people than they'd been before. "Bessie, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret not having us arrested? Not pressing charges?" I considered the question while I stirred chocolate into the warm milk. It wasn't the first time she'd asked, and probably wouldn't be the last. "No, justice isn't always about punishment, Fallon. Sometimes it's about restoration. But we could have destroyed you. We almost did destroy you, but you didn't. And more importantly, you chose not to when you had the chance to change course. Only because you caught us. No, because when I offered you a choice between being family or walking away, you chose family. That choice changed everything." She was quiet for a moment, typing notes on her laptop. Then, "I'm going to be a good nurse. I know you are. And I'm going to be a good daughter-in-law. You already are." It was true. Somewhere in the process of rebuilding trust and learning to communicate, Fallon had become the daughter I'd never had. Not the daughter I'd imagined, but the daughter who was real, complicated, and worth loving. "Mom?" Desmond's voice called from the living room. "Can you come here for a second?" I found him standing by the mantelpiece, holding an envelope. Tommy was back to studying the chessboard, determined to find the perfect move. "What is it?" "This came in the mail today." He handed me the envelope, his expression unreadable. Inside was a check made out to me for $38,412, the exact amount I'd given up from my savings and insurance policy to help pay his debts, plus interest. "Desmond, what is this?" "It's your money. I've been putting aside every spare dollar for the past 6 months. Fallon, too. We sold her car and bought a used one. We moved to a smaller apartment. We stopped eating out, stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary." I stared at the check, feeling tears well up in my eyes. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. Not because you expected it, but because it was the right thing to do. You saved my life, Mom. The least I could do was save your financial security. I thought about refusing it, about telling him to keep the money for his future, but I realized that accepting it was important for him. He needed to know that he could make amends, that he could be the kind of man who paid his debts and kept his promises. Thank you. He hugged me then, and I was struck by how different he felt. Stronger somehow, more solid. The man hugging me wasn't the desperate, frightened person who'd tried to steal my house 6 months ago. This was someone who'd faced his demons and won. There's something else, he said when we separated. What? Fallon and I want to buy a house, a real house, not an apartment, somewhere we can put down roots. That's wonderful. We want to buy it next door to you. I blinked in surprise. Next door? But Mrs. Patterson's house isn't for sale. It will be. She's decided to move to that retirement community you visited with her. She asked me to tell you she'd like to sell it to someone she knows will take good care of it. Mrs. Patterson's house, the little blue cottage with the white picket fence and the rose garden that had always made me slightly envious. It was perfect for a young couple starting over. Are you sure? Living next door to your mother might cramp your style. Desmond laughed, a sound I'd been hearing more often lately. Mom, I think we've established that I need all the supervision I can get. What does Fallon think about this plan? It was her idea. I looked toward the kitchen where I could see Fallon hunched over her laptop, studying for a test that would help her become a nurse. 6 months ago, she'd been planning to steal my house and put me in a nursing home. Now she wanted to live next door so we could be neighbors. I think that sounds perfect. That evening, after Tommy had been picked up by his parents and Fallon had gone home to study, Desmond and I sat on my front porch drinking sweet tea and watching the sunset. It was something we'd started doing regularly, these quiet moments where we could just be mother and son without the weight of crisis or conflict. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you hate me? After everything I did, everything I put you through, why didn't you just write me off? I thought about the question, about all the moments over the past 6 months when I could have chosen anger instead of love, punishment instead of forgiveness. Because you're my son, and because everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were. But I almost destroyed you. No, you almost destroyed yourself. I was just collateral damage. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black. Tomorrow, Fallon would come over for our weekly garden session. Next week, Desmond would celebrate 6 months of sobriety from gambling. Next month, we'd start looking at furniture for their new house next door. I love you, Mom. I love you too, son. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the trip to Spain I'd never taken. For months, I'd wondered what would have happened if I hadn't forgotten my passport, if I'd gotten on that plane and come home to find my house empty and my life stolen. But I realized I didn't need to wonder about that anymore, because what had happened instead was better than any trip I could have taken. I'd discovered that my son was worth fighting for. I'd learned that families can be broken and rebuilt stronger than before. And I'd found out that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let other people's choices destroy your capacity for love. 6 months ago, I'd thought I was losing everything that mattered. Instead, I'd found everything I'd never known I wanted. I fell asleep in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own things, with my family safely next door planning their future. Some victories are loud and dramatic. This one was quiet and real, and it was mine. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.